Hello everybody and welcome. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Simrad Live Webinar. We're here in South Florida, down in Key Biscayne, and tonight we're going to be walking you through the Halo dome radars, and we're going to be going through the setup and processes and teaching you how to get the most out of your radar. So the first question I always get when I talk to customers or I'm working shows is why? Why would we put a dome radar on a vessel? Why won't we just go into a big open array? When we talk about dome radars, the reason we use those is they're great for navigation and situational awareness, meaning looking for targets, looking for buoys, markers, other boats around yours. So with the dome radar, it's nothing that we're going to be using to find birds and targets that are 96 miles away. But when you want to see and stay safe on the water, whether you're nighttime navigating, whether you're in busy traffic ways, whether you're in unfamiliar waterways looking for an entranceway, looking for buoys or Raycon buoys, a dome radar is going to be a great option for you because it's going to give you the best target separation and resolution, and it's going to make it easy for you to find your way. So the next thing we want to start talking about is, once we do decide to get that radar, is we're going to go and we're going to start doing some installation. So the first thing I want to talk about is pulling the cables. So with our dome radars, they are solid state radars, which mean that all the processing is being done upstairs. So we're pulling a very small cable, about the size of your pinky, through the chaseways, bringing it down, and all it is carrying power and Ethernet for communication to get that video signal. So the biggest things we run into when we're talking about installations and running those cables is when you're pulling that cable from top down. We have a lot of people that when they start pulling that cable down, they actually tie and pull that RJ45 connector. So what ends up happening is we start pulling those wires out, we get poor connection, and now we don't get communication with the radar. The other thing that we run into is when they're running 12 volts, they're running too small a gauge wire. So what happens is we get some power fluctuation or power drop. So we need to take those into account when we're pulling those cables through the vessel. Now the next thing I want to talk about, we're going to go to the screen because I have downloaded a picture here, is when we mount the actual dome onto the hardtop. So I'm going to simulate the hardtop with this piece of paper. If I mount that dome on the leading edge of my hardtop, you notice I'm not obstructing any of my radar transmit signal. Right here we're only showing the bottom half, so it's 22 degrees down, and it'll also be 22 degrees up. But if I do start moving that radar further back on my hardtop or my T-top, you notice that I'm now reducing the amount of output signal for that lower half. So I am losing everything below that hardtop. And what happens here is you start losing targets that come close to the boat. You start getting false echoes that bounce up. So now we're deteriorating the signal return for our radar. So now what this chart shows is if I raise, and it tells me how high to raise that to get my optimum performance. So when we're 3 foot back on the hardtop, if I put in an 8 to 10 inch riser, I will get all the signal. Now sometimes that's not always available, so you may have to go to a 6 or maybe a 4 inch riser. So we can do that, but you notice now you get more signal coming out the lower half of that radar, which allows me to see targets closer up. So it's something to take into account. It's something that I do get a lot of issues on, or a lot of questions on when we start talking about installing that radar and why I can't see vessels that might be 10, 20, 30 feet in front of the boat because I've got it way too far back on the hardtop. So now, once we've got the radar installed, we need to go through the setup process. And again, like I told you, because this is a solid state radar, the processing is being done upstairs. So there's not a whole bunch we have to do, but we will go into the home button, we'll go into settings, we'll go into radar, and we go into installation. Now what I like to do when I first start, just to make sure I have everything set up properly, is I go into my radar status. So this tells me if I've got a heading sensor tied into the network. So if I don't have a heading sensor, you won't have radar overlay. You won't have the ability to do target tracking. So when it says that I've got target tracking, that means I actually have a 10 hertz compass in the system, not just a 5 or 1 hertz. So 5 or 1 hertz, we can actually do just a radar overlay. So by using our GS25 we can do radar, but we can't do Marpa target tracking. If we put on our Precision 9, we can now do that Marpa target tracking. So this tells us that we're actually reading, it's in true, we're getting an actual heading input, it's on the network, we've got valid GPS, and the big one is we've got no error codes. So that means everything is performing properly. So the next setting is the antenna setup, or the measurements, or where is it located on our vessel. And when you go into this menu, you want to make sure it's from center line, not the bow of the boat. So when we're talking about this X and Y axis, it's from the dot, from the dead center of the boat. So is the scanner forward? If it is forward of dead center, then I'm going to increase my Y. So on our vessel, I'm roughly 2 feet in front of the dead center of the boat. And then our axis from left to right, which is the X axis. For me, we're good, so I'm not going to change that. But now I've set up where that antenna is located on the vessel. And again, you're going to put in how high. So we need to know off the water, so we can also go in and adjust other settings and features. Adjust bearing alignment. So adjust bearing alignment, when we install that radar, we may not install it dead midships and looking completely straight in front of us. So now what we have the ability to do is, as we see here, we've got a marker in front of the vessel. We can hit bearing alignment and we can add or subtract to make sure that that target is dead center of that line. So what we want to do is first stand down the center of the boat, look straight down in the middle of the boat, right down the bow, and you want to manually steer that boat to that mark and then adjust that bearing alignment to make sure that it is sitting dead center on the boat. So we can see, simply hit back, hit save, and now we've done that. The next one down is side lobe suppression, and again, we're not going to ask you to touch that. That is something that we will only go into if we end up having serious issues with smaller target detection. This is something that's set up at the factory, so we really don't want you to go in there and change that. It is preset. In the event you do have problems, please contact product support, or we can get some service personnel, qualified service personnel on the boat to go in and adjust that. So it's something we don't want you to do. The next thing down is sector blanking. Sector blanking is basically setting up an area where we do not want the radar to transmit. Now, why would we want to not transmit a radar in a certain area? Well, if we're on a tower boat, we've got some tower legs that are giving us some false echoes or bounce backs. So it's erroneous returns that are showing up. We may have a SATCOM or a TV antenna on the roof, and we do not want the radar to transmit into that. We may have a thermal imaging camera. We don't want to transmit or get false returns from that. So we can go in and set up to 4 sectors where we turn off our transmit. So we simply start with the first sector, we enable it, and then you notice we can go in and now make adjustments. So where is it in reference to the boat? And how wide. So we can increase or decrease it. So obviously you want to try and create it as small as possible, because you notice when I do blank in this zone, I'm not getting any target returns because I'm no longer transmitting. So as I make my sweep, I stop transmit and then start on the other leading edge and continue around. So we want to make sure we're trying to make it as small as possible so we reduce the amount of area that we do not see targets. For our purposes here, we're going to turn it back off. The other setting here is the halo light. So all of our halo radars do have some blue lights, whether they're the domes are underneath, the open arrays are on the sides. You do have the ability to control those lights. So we can leave it on low, medium, high, or just completely turn it off if we don't want it at all. So this is where you would control that setting. Reset radar to factory defaults. This is if somebody's gone in there, completely buggered the settings, and you want to now start fresh, start back at square one. We would reset that radar and now go through that setup process that we just described. So once we're done with that menu, the next menu I'm going to go into is our vessels and tracked targets. So this is where we're going to set up our TCPA and CPA, so time to closest point of approach and closest point of approach. What these are is a time and a distance when we want an alarm to come up on the display based on AIS or Marpa targets, and we can set that up again, like I said, based on time, where if it's within 3 minutes of reaching the vessel, or right here, right now we have 500 feet. Now you're going to set this up based on your vessel. Higher speed vessels, you're going to want to increase those times and those distances. Slower vessels, you can bring those down. The other thing I want to show you is, if you look, is range of interest. So range of interest is basically an AIS filter. So if we get into an area where we've got a lot of AIS targets that are just cluttering our screen, and this is whether it's the chart or the radar screen, we have the ability to put in filtering. So as it comes out of the box is awesome. These all targets, show them at all times. When we go auto based on radar range, only show the ones in the radar range. So as I zoom in or out, only the ones that are visible. And then you do have based on nautical miles. So if I only want to see within 2 nautical miles, it'll only show those. And again, it will declutter the screen and clear it up. When you're finished, you simply hit save. The next setting I want to show you is going to be vessels. So vessels, we're going to go in and we have extension lines. You notice we have for our own vessel, and then we also have for other vessels, so our AIS and Marpa targets. Now you notice we have 2 for our own vessel, course over ground and heading. I do like to turn both of them on if I do have a heading sensor, because when I'm out drift fishing, I want to know where the boat is pointed versus where we're actually moving. So when I'm trying to drift over a certain target, I can make sure that that vessel is traveling that right direction, or move the vessel to make sure I hit that target I'm trying to go over. So right now we're just going to put on our heading line. When we get to other vessels, this is where we can put on those tracked targets their own course over ground. So it's directional based on their movement. Length you can set, whether it's mileage, whether it's minutes, you have the ability, or whether it goes completely off the screen, you have the ability to set that up. So we'll just leave it at 2 minutes for now, and we'll play later. Hit save. The other thing we want to talk about is history length. So when we're talking about history length, we now get to put trails on our tracked targets. So now I can go in and put on for up to a minute a trail over a tracked target, which we'll show you later on, but that's AIS or our Marpa targets. We can actually see a nice trail behind the vessel. The other thing that I like to look at and always change is our AIS icon orientation. Out of the box, it is set to heading. I like to move this to course over ground, because if we're dealing with a lot of vessels out there that only have Class B AISs and may not have a compass on the boat, we don't get rate of turn, we don't get heading. So when we set it to course over ground, we now take that GPS, which is a minimum requirement for a transmit AIS, and now we can get its course over ground. So now the vessel will actually move and not be stuck in a north-up configuration and have a bearing line showing like it's drifting. So it actually moves the vessel, points it in the proper direction. The last thing I do want to show you is velocity track. So you have the ability to turn on velocity track. So that's the last setup we're going to talk about. So with velocity track, that is our Doppler tracking system. So basically, vessels based on their speed, we can actually color them based on the color palette we're in. If it's a vessel that's heading towards us, we can see right here, it's going to be yellow. If it's a vessel that's moving away, it'll actually be blue. So when we go into that setting, normal means we want to see both approaching as well as diverging or leaving targets. We want them. If we don't care about those diverging or leaving targets, then we can just put approaching only. So we're only looking for those yellow targets that are traveling towards our vessel. And then when we're in there, settings, this is where we can put in a speed threshold. Where do we want to drop that target? If it drops below a certain speed, where do we want that threshold to where we pick it up or we drop it off? And that's where we can set that, and we can use those thresholds for all radar sources. So that's going to be our basic radar setup, or going through some quick things on installation, but setting that radar up first, getting that done completely will now help you when you want to go and use it, because now we know targets are in the right position. We know if we want to track, we've got all the correct information on. So we're going to stop right there. We're going to go and see if we've got any questions out there on installation and that first quick setup. So I've got some other staff on the boat. Let's see if they come up with any questions from the field.
We have another quick question about setting up the Marpa tracking. We had a little bit of a hang up during that, so you can retouch on the Marpa tracking real quick.
Okay, so somebody wrote in and said that I guess we had some technical issues and setting up that Marpa tracking, or setting up how we set those vessel track lines. So I'm going to go back into that real quick. So we're going to hit our home button. We'll go into settings. We're going to go into vessels. And if we go to history length, that's what puts those trails behind our targets. So if we've got AIS or Marpa targets, you will see a dynamic colored trail that will show how that vessel has traveled, its past history. So like running a track line on your current vessel, it will do that for a tracked target. The other thing we're going to look at is extension lines. This is where we can turn on the course over ground. So this puts a line in front of the vessel. Where is it heading to? So the other one was saying, where has it been? This is where is it traveling now? This is very important because that'll tell you whether he's turning into you or away from you. And again, as we go and show tracking targets, we'll see that in action. Simply hit save when we're finished and X out.
So for a really short cable run, can you cut the cable, or do you prefer to coil it? This is for Halo 20 Plus.
Okay, so our next question was, can we cut the cable, cut the radar cable? We do have the ability to cut the radar cable because all of our processing is being done upstairs. So now we don't have, it's not as critical as with magnetron radars where we have timing issues and other settings that we have to pay attention to. So I don't like to go too short. I mean, I wouldn't do something that's only 6 foot. I would definitely leave some cable length there. We can coil up a little bit, but we do not have to do a 20-meter cable run when we're only running 20 feet from the scanner to the Ethernet network. So yes, you can. And just remember, we'll have to put on that RJ45 connector, new onto the radar cable, and then we do have the wires for power that we do have to wire up as well. And you'll notice in there, there's going to be a red wire, a yellow wire, and a black wire. Black is ground, red is our input power, 12 or 24, and yellow is what we call our wake-up wire or our ignition wire. So we have options. We can use from the MFD, we can use the power control, or we can use another relay or a switch, or we can tie it to our red wire and use that when the breaker comes on, that the radar comes on. So the red and black is the power, the yellow is kind of that wake-up wire or how it starts that radar. So we need to pay attention to that yellow wire and make sure that's connected as well.
What is the minimum heading sensor requirement for Marpa? I think you said it, but just to verify.
Okay, we had another question. What's the minimum heading requirement for Marpa? So for Marpa, where we're actually going to track targets from our radar, we have to have 10 hertz input. So 10 hertz heading input. So for Navico, that's our Precision 9 compass. If we're using some third-party devices, anything that will transmit in 10 hertz, minimum of 10 hertz, will give us Marpa. We just need a 1 or 5 hertz antenna like our GS25 to do radar overlay. That's overlaying our radar on top of our chart. We just need to be able to synchronize those. So you may see on fast turns that it may not synchronize and it may take time to catch up, but it will eventually catch up. If you have that higher interface, that 10 hertz interface, that radar will travel a lot faster and stay as you're making those high-speed turns.
And then one last one, just kind of a revisit. What were the screen menu settings for the initial setup of the radar on Evo 3?
Okay, somebody asked how do we get back to those initial installation page on our radar. So it's our home button, whether you touch the button or the icon in the corner, it's settings, and then we go to radar, and then you've got installation. And then you go through the steps and continue on with your setup.
I'm going to move on.
All right. So now that we've got our radar set up, the next thing we're going to do is start using it. So when we're talking about any of our Halo products, we're going to go into our menu. And we'll go back to where it first starts. And you notice the first button is mode. So mode is some preset settings in the radar that will automatically set the radar up. So for harbor, means that we're in an area where we have very low wave height, so that way we're not getting false returns. So basically what we're doing is we're trimming down that sea clutter because we want to get it as aggressive as possible. It's also an area where we may have a lot of vessel traffic. We have a lot of different targets, whether they're small to mid, all the way up to large targets. So we want to get this radar as aggressive as possible to be able to track that. So when we're in harbor mode, what the system will do is set up high-speed scan, because we want to get the fastest update rate because we're in a smaller area, we have traffic going by, we have buoys and markers we need to pay attention to, so it sets our scanner speed up at our highest speed. So we have the ability, and I'll show you later, to do it into 24, which is standard radar, 36, or 48 RPM, so it sets it up to 48 RPM. But under that 48 RPM or fast scan, we also have a 60 RPM setting, so anytime we're below 2 miles on the radar, that scanner will go 60 RPM. So we're basically getting an update rate every second. So that's what harbor mode does. Offshore is basically what it says. When we're out away, we're in traditional sea conditions, whether it's heavy or light sea conditions, we've just got waves. We've got, besides targets and boats, we're not going to be really concerned looking for marker poles when we get offshore. So now we change the way we adjust that sea clutter. And then that scanner rate will also be in that medium or high range based on your scale. So as we zoom out, it will slow it down. As we zoom in, it will speed it up. So offshore, again, is exactly what it says. When we're offshore, when we're out in the seas, we want to eliminate those false echoes. So we change the settings. Next one down is weather. So you notice the screen's already changing, but weather now sets the settings up to see how storm cells are made, how clouds and clouds with water in them and how they hold it and how they represent and come back. So this allows us to look at a storm cell and be able to tell where the density of that storm cell is versus where the outlying edges are, where we might have some speckle. So now it allows us to drive our boat maybe around the hard cell, get into a weaker front area, so we can now get around, stay out of lightning, stay out of getting totally drenched, maybe get in through just that light rain side. Also being able to split a cell, so if you've got a big cloud in front of you but you notice that the cells are on the edge, you can split those. So that's where weather comes in handy. And also, nice thing about weather is that velocity track works on those storm cells, so we can now tell if it's a yellow cloud, it's now heading towards us. If it's blue, it's heading away. So that's a really neat feature, that velocity track will track those as well. So now we can see what's happening, whether we need to start picking up our speed or we don't have to worry about it, it's leaving us. The last one is bird. Yes, there is a bird mode in our Halo Dome radars, but remember, the transmit power in these is not going to get you birds 6, 12 miles away. That's not what a dome radar does. It's not designed to look for those small targets. It does not have the power to pick up those small targets. It can be useful. And what we say by that is, because it's setting it to look for smaller targets, as we start getting further and further away from marker poles or some small boats, some kayakers, we can put on that bird mode to make it look for those smaller targets, be a little more aggressive. So it tunes and it changes those settings to make it more aggressive. So in a dome, bird mode is not, you're going to see it with the naked eye where you're going to see it on the screen with the radar. So remember, bird mode is not designed to find birds in a dome. It's a different set of settings. You're going to have to go to an open array. It's higher power. It's a tighter beam angle, meaning we're focusing more power in a smaller area, so we'll get those returns. And I saved it for last, but it's custom. And custom is manual mode. So we do allow you to go in and manually set up the radar however you want. So when I am in custom mode, you notice I can set up my gain, sea, and rain clutter. So gain is, how intensified you want it to be. Sea clutter is a filter to cut those false echoes. Rain clutter, you're only going to use whether you're in rain or snow. Obviously here in South Florida, we're never going to have that issue with snow, but when you get into heavier rain storms, you're going to start noticing speckle all over the screen. So rather than going and increasing your seed clutter, which is going to hide the targets underneath the rain, you're going to bring up your rain clutter. So it knows to just take off the lightest edge, take off those speckles, and clean up just that rain. But when we go into advanced, here's where now we can go in and set different filters. So you've got noise rejection. So if we're now out and there's a lot of false echoes, we've got boats, we've got buildings, towers, we got things around us that are creating a lot of noise, we can go and increase this noise rejection. So by bringing it up is increasing the filter, which is reducing those targets coming in, those smaller or lighter target returns coming in. So you got to be careful. You don't want to take it too high, where now we start filtering out those targets. Target expansion. When we go into target expansion, we have low, medium, and high. And what that basically does is it makes those smaller targets grow in size. So this is nice when we are looking for those kayakers, those small poles and markers, that we can actually explode them to show them up larger on the screen by simply going in and adjusting that target expansion. So again, I'll drop it back down to low, and you notice that it shrinks those targets. So it takes a return and it falsely increases the size just to allow you to see those smaller targets. Inner threshold, I skipped threshold. Threshold, it's preset at the factory at 30%. So this is where we start filtering those targets that we tend to think of as false targets or just false echoes. Returns that are coming back in from false wave heights, from just noise around the vessel. You do have the ability to control it. You notice if you do take threshold down, you're going to start seeing more clutter, more speckle, more things that are actually not really there. And if you do increase that as well, you are going to start peeling off some targets that you want to see. So you do have the ability to make it a little more aggressive or a little less aggressive. So if you are looking for smaller targets, you might want to manually bring that down. If you're really only focusing on some of the larger objects, you can bring that up. Interference rejection. This is if you have another halo radar transmitting close to your vessel. So now we're getting false echoes because we're getting its transmit pulse into our receiver circuit. So this is where we're going to go in, and we're going to increase that to reduce those false echoes. And you might start seeing across the screen where you get something like this, but in an area that you know there's nothing there, you might get 4 or 5 targets backed up right behind itself. That's usually what we see when we start getting those false returns from other radars. You might get a line that starts streaking off. Again, you just start seeing all these targets all over the screen, and it's just coming from somebody else with a similar radar transmitting. So you just go in and manually increase it. Again, it's a filter. You don't want to inadvertently run it to high when low or medium works, because now you're also going to start filtering your return targets. So you want to try and keep it as low as possible on these filters so that we're not reducing our real target returns. Target separation. So target separation, so if you're in an area like a marina or an anchorage where you've got a lot of boats or a lot of marker poles, and what we're used to, especially with magnetron radars, you'll get these targets and it'll just show it as one large target. So when we do target separation, we can now focus the beam. So we're reducing the beam angle, focusing it electronically. So now those targets will be separated and independent. And now we can see all of the surrounding targets where they actually are, not being grouped together with another close target. But the thing we need to pay attention to is when we increase that, we will also reduce the distance that the radar will be able to work. So because we're focusing that, we usually use this in short range. So we're talking 3 to 4 miles and under, because we want to see all those targets that are close around the boat. We want to pay attention to them. So we do need to remember that if we do put it on high, we are reducing the distance that our radar can actually work to see some of the other smaller targets that are out there. So remember, use it to your benefit, and then when you are finished, either put it back on low or off so that we can bring that target when we set up to our 25, 36 miles, we can start seeing those targets that are out there past 12 miles. Smaller targets will be seen. And then fast scan, remember we were talking about the ability to do our scanning. So off is traditional 24 RPM. That's what every radar up till we started these solid state radars was transmitting at. When we go to our medium, this is now where we're stepping it up to 36 RPM. When we go to high, this is where we'll do 48 RPM, or as you see on the screen now, if we're below 2 miles or 2 miles or below, you'll notice it's doing it at 60 RPM. Once we increase our range past that 2 miles, it will step down to 48 RPM. This is great, especially if you've got some of these go fast boats and you're zoomed in tight around the boat within a mile or so, and you want to have those update rates a lot faster. So as you see other traffic traveling with you or crossing your paths, this now allows you to update it a lot faster without outdriving your radar and giving you the best target representation and where it's traveling and moving to. So it's preset in the modes, but in custom you have the ability to set it up to what you want. So I'm going to go back, and since we're playing in here, I'll go in harbor mode. And even in some of the modes, we do have some things we can turn and play with. You notice that when we go into anything outside of custom, we gray out a lot of that because it's preset. So like here, all we have is the ability to change interference rejection. So when we're in that mode, if we have another radar transmitting, we can control that. But outside of that, that mode is setting that stuff up. We go into more. Again, we talked about velocity track, but this is also where you can change your color palettes. So again, you can customize this to how you want to see it, black or white background. You have the ability to control how that looks. So sometimes those yellow targets, some people like how they show up better on a white background versus a black background. So you have the ability to set that up to how you want to view it. Orientation, so you can do heads up, north up, course up. So now we can orient the radar. Again, it's all your personal preference. Position. So we do have the ability to change the position of where our radar, where our picture is seen on the screen. So out of the box, it is center. We do have something called look ahead. So look ahead, you notice the screen kind of changes. We've got kind of this inner circle along with our outer rings. This inner circle is your compass rose. So because we have a heading, we do now have the ability to still see our compass rose. We know that we're heading roughly 30 degrees, and then we're starting to move, but that's your compass rose. But what also changes is your range rings, and your range rings go all the way out to the edge of your screen. So now, if I'm traveling and I'm running and I don't really care what's behind me, I only want to see what's in front of me, I now have the ability to see more targets, more returns in front of the vessel versus splitting that screen in half. When we go to offset, I have the ability to go in and select an offset. So maybe I want to see more to the left or the right of the vessel. You have the ability to manually move that offset wherever you want. So you don't have to just stick with it dead center and roughly 20% above the bottom of the screen. And then we go back to center. True motion, so with true motion, right now we're what we call relative motion, means the boat stays in the center and the targets will move below you. True motion is the boat moves and then redraws and drops back down. So that's true motion. Symbology is basically, do we want everything on and off the screen? And target trails, this is if we want to turn on all the trails on all the target returns. It can get pretty busy when you're inshore. I'll just show you real quickly. As you'll notice that we'll just set it up for 30 seconds. So unlike just tracking vessels that like AIS and Marpa, this is every radar target. So this is something we're definitely not going to want to use when we're inshore, because you notice all of those targets show the movement across the screen. This is something that you might use with an open array when you are looking for birds, because now it'll keep that target on the screen for those additional seconds. EBL VRM, so that's electronic bearing line and variable range marker. We have the ability to put two of those on. So what that just means is that we can actually put a range and bearing line on the screen. And so if we need to, we can move in or out, we can change. So if we need to see something on a target and we want to maybe just travel to that target, we now know how far away it is and what our bearing is to get there. And now we know the actual line. So instead of having to put a waypoint on the screen and follow that, we can actually set up that electronic bearing line and know that if I want to intersect that target, I just steer my boat and I travel that line. So it's a way to to use that kind of as a navigational aid. And again, we turn those on or off. So now that we've gone in and we've set up and we've got our settings, basic usage. So you notice we have a plus and minus where we can actually manually range in and out. We also can use the rotary knob and zoom real quick in and out and see those targets. Some of the screen setups that you have available to you is if we go into home, obviously you know if I press that I always get that full page. I do have the ability, maybe I want to split this. I have the ability to press any icon, and whatever icon I press is always on the left hand side, and then every other icon in the menu is always to the right of it. So something that is really nice is you notice here's my cursor here, that these cursors are locked. So when I'm doing side by side, whether I see a target on my radar or whether I see a target on my chart, those cursors will always show the exact same spot. So again, just a quick way to find out, is that a marker? Yep, that target is a marker. So it's just a quick way, because those cursors are locked, it's just a quick way to see where that target is in reference to the vessel based on my chart versus my radar. We also have the ability, when we talk about splitting, is we can do dual range radar. So because we are solid state, because processing is done upstairs, we have the ability to do 2 independent screens, 2 independent settings, and 2 independent ranges being drawn at the same time, which means every sweep is going to always show the 2 mile and the 6 mile. The reason being is because this is pulse compression radar. What that means is we're sending out in a single output pulse all of the transmit pulses for the full range. So whether it's 36 or 48 mile, we're sending that out at one time. So that means anything from my 400-foot range all the way out to my 48-mile range is being brought back into the scanner, brought back into the processor, and can be manipulated. Where we have some problems with some of our competitors where they actually will jump from sweep on this screen, sweep on that screen, sweep on this screen, sweep on that screen. So this is nice because we're getting true time. So if we're doing 60 RPM, we're getting both updated 1 time a second. So you do notice that you've got a halo A and a halo B. So those are our 2 radar receivers. So if I go in and I want to control either one, I need to make sure I tap the screen and highlight the box around the radar. Now I can go into menu and I can transmit B. Now you notice in B I'm in weather mode. In A I'm in harbor mode. So we can have complete independent setups, complete independent ranges. Where this comes in handy is I might be navigating or staying tight around my boat, want to make sure that I'm clean in traffic, but yet on my other one, this is unfamiliar waterways, I might be looking for this entranceway, and now I need to find out those markers to get in there. I now have the ability to roll out on one of those ranges and to be able to see those markers to get into that entranceway. So it gives you a lot more abilities by adding that dual range. So we can see close and far. We don't have to continuously change our ranges in and out, in and out. We can leave them side by side. The other thing I want to show you is if we do have a chart, we also have the ability to overlay. So if we go into overlay, we can choose radar. Now remember, like I discussed earlier, for radar overlay, the minimum requirement is a 1 or 5 hertz heading sensor. So we have to have a minimum of 1 or 5 hertz heading sensor. We have to have the ability to synchronize the radar layer on top of our chart layer. And a big thing you'll find is when you do this, that if your compass is not orientated properly to the vessel, those 2 will not coincide. Whether they're drastically off or they're only off by a couple degrees. So if they are off, we go into our home menu our settings menu, we scroll down to network and device list. And if I go into my Precision 9 and configure, I have the ability to put in my offset. So when this compass was installed, it was off by a couple degrees. We don't have to go in and continuously move and remount that compass to make it right. We can actually add or subtract up to 180 degrees to get those two to synchronize and lay correctly on top of each other. Now when we do radar overlay, there's some nice features I want to show you here. Yes, we're overlaying the radar on our chart, but we actually have 3 layers here. We have our chart, we have our radar, and then on top we have all of our nav aids. So all of these nav aids, all these icons are always the top layer. We put it on the top layer because we figure those are what you're really looking for. We want to make sure we're seeing the markers. But the nice thing is we can see the targets underneath it, and we can see that we're drawing them. So now I know that that radar target is that marker. So I don't want a radar target that's over it, that's covering something that I might need for safety, for navigation. So we always do that as that 3rd layer, that upper layer. So that is a great way that you know you're never going to lose any of that data. Now while we're doing our overlay, we still have the ability to control our radar. So we can go in and we can make our adjustments, change our settings. We can go in and transparency. So how aggressive do I want to allow the chart below to be seen? So by increasing my transparency, I allow the chart to be seen through the radar target. So again, this is all personalization. You set it up how you want to see it. You can change your ranges. We can go into advanced settings. Again, because we're in the mode, we can't change anything but interference rejection. So again, just a great way to use that radar with your chart, especially a single screen. Now we don't have to split, go to smaller screens. We just overlaid one on the other. And if you notice, we still have things happening like our yellow targets. So we definitely have something coming up from behind. So there's a target that our velocity track is seeing, and it's showing up as that yellow target. And in this palette, when it starts to diverge or leave, it will go to a gray color in this overlay. But talking about tracking of targets, if we go in, so we've got something over here, keep it straight. And basically, when we find a target that we want to watch, so I've got this here. I'm going to try and slow down the rotation of the boat so it makes it easier for me to track. Because I have my Precision 9, my 10 Hertz, I can go in, put the cursor on that and hit acquire target. Now you notice that I now have that square box around that target. That means it's got it, it's tracking it, it's trying to set up all the features and functions. Boom. Notice my extension line in the front, my course over ground line. That is because, remember, I set that up under vessels. I'll finish acquiring, we'll clear cursor. And then what's going to happen is after it sets up that, because we do have the trails, it will slowly and eventually start giving me those trails behind the vessel. And give it a few more seconds. It looks like it's trying to set my let me make sure I did turn that on. History length, yes, so history length is there. So we're just waiting for it to, there, it looks like we're starting to acquire our history length now. So you can see behind the vessel. Again, sometimes things might be easier. I'm going to go in and let's clear my cursor. I'm going to go in some more. I'm going to go back to my black palette so we can kind of show that blue line a little bit better for you on the camera. So you can see that I'm now getting behind this vessel, that blue line. That is that target trail. And I basically said I want it on for a minute, and it will continue to draw that behind that vessel. It is definitely slow moving. We're actually moving faster than that vessel. There's a slow sailboat behind us, but we're now we're tracking that target, and we're seeing its trails, its vector on which way it's moving. Another nice thing is, if I tap that and you notice that comes up and I press the rotary knob or the checkbox, I can now look at that target and find out all the information about it. So now I can see, yep, status is it's safe because I know it's leaving, it's heading away from me. But now I got distance, I got bearing, I've got its speed. So now we have everything about that target. So that's a great way. And then if I do go back to my menu, I can then go in and cancel targets, and that will allow me to remove that.
Scott has two screens. When he tries to have one screen on a longer range and another on a shorter range, it wouldn't let him. How do you fix that?
Okay, so Scott's telling me that he has two screens, and he says that he can't put one radar on a short range and one radar on a long range. This could be caused by two different problems. The first thing is, if he has a Halo 20, not a 20 plus or a 24, a Halo 20, dual range features are not in that unit. If he does have a 20 plus or a 24, we can put either side by side or one on one display, one on another. So what we'll do is, if we go back to the screen, the first thing I'm going to do is go to standby. And when I go to standby, you notice you've got the word sources. With sources, you go in and select which radar you want on which screen. So in one display, I would do Halo A. In the other display, I would do Halo B. And what I mean by that is I'm going to inadvertently choose the wrong radar. And now when I go into my dual range, you'll notice that they both say Halo B. So as long as they both say Halo B, if I go in here and I change my mode, or I go in and change my range, they both change. It's because I'm controlling the same receiver circuit. I'm controlling Halo B. If I again go in, back, go to standby, and now in one I go to Halo A, and one I have Halo B. Now if I go back and hit transmit, you'll notice only one screen turns on, the other is off until I go and activate that screen. So just setting up the proper radar receiver circuit that you want to control, and just remember there's two, so select A or B. Anything else?
If the target track moves out of range of the setting, will it continue to be tracked or does it get dropped?
Okay, so the question is, if the target moves out of the range, will it continue to be recorded or will it drop? Again, it will continue. So it will continue, even though it's out of your pass range, it's going to continue to track that target until one of two things. Either the radar target gets lost, so maybe it's hooked the corner, it's pulled into the marina, it's now parked the vessel, or it gets lost in the marina traffic, then you will get an alarm that says target lost, or you go into the menu and go down and say cancel targets, cancel all, and then it will cancel that target. So it will continue as long as the radar can track that target. That's it? All right. So I think we're going to stop there. We've gone through quite a bit of information to let you digest. You can go back to Simrad Live and replay this video. So you do have the ability to go back and find it, replay it. So if you do want to pick up some of the tips and tricks that we talked about tonight, and maybe you forgot how to do something, you can do that. We also do put up different types of YouTube videos, so also look up Halo radar. There's a lot of usage videos that we've done and put out there as well. And we will continue on next month getting into more of a deeper dive, going into some new features and functions that we have with the new NOS 20.2 software that we just released. So we'll dig deeper into that software and teach you a little bit more about the radar. So again, thank you all for joining us this evening. In the event you do have some additional questions, you can contact product support, so either by going onto the website and hitting the contact us there, or you can dial 1-800-326-4487 and connect directly to our product support personnel. Thank you and good evening.